then go across country and then down another county road for a ways. So it's about 15 miles today.
Bose Ikard once rode straight into 80 miles of Texas with no water on it at all. Not a creek, not a puddle, not a stock tank, just sand between two crossings on the Pecos, while 2,000 thirsty longhorns behind him could smell that river for miles and go insane trying to reach it. He rode that gap 4 separate years. When Charles Goodnight was asked who he trusted most, he named the black cowboy riding drag. Here is what that cost. Across 1,000 miles with no roads, no refrigeration, and almost no sleep. Start with food. A man who can't eat can't survive 14 hours in a saddle. Before 1866, a cowboy ate whatever fit in his saddlebag, dried meat and hardtack chewed on horseback without stopping. Then Goodnight, the same man from the river crossing, took an old army surplus wagon, gutted it, and built drawers into the back for flour, coffee beans, and a water barrel bolted to the side. He called it a chuckwagon. The name stuck so hard that a century and a half later, people still call a meal chuck without knowing where the word came from. The cook rode ahead of the herd every single morning, alone in the dark, to have breakfast smoking over a fire before the crew even opened their eyes. He was often the highest paid man in the outfit, and not just because he could cook. He was the crew's doctor, its dentist, and its banker, all folded into one man crouched over a cast-iron skillet. What that man cooked was almost never beef. That's the part people get backwards. The herd wasn't the menu. The herd was the entire paycheck, and nobody eats their paycheck. So the real food was salt pork, cured hard enough to survive weeks in a wooden crate, beans simmered for hours, biscuits fried in bacon grease, and coffee boiled thick enough to keep a man upright at 2 in the morning. There was no icebox riding along behind them and no root cellar out on open prairie. If beef did hit the fire, it was because an animal had broken a leg and couldn't be saved, and the crew ate it fast before the Texas heat turned the meat into a liability. Refrigeration wasn't a convenience they skipped, it simply hadn't been invented yet. Sleep came apart even faster, and it started before sunrise. 4 o'clock in the morning, the cook was already hammering a pan to wake the outfit, and every man had to roll and tie his own bedroll, or the wagon left it behind in the dirt without asking twice. That bedroll, 2 blankets rolled inside oiled canvas, was the only bedroom a cowboy owned for 3 straight months. Where a bunkhouse should have been, there was just open ground, whatever weather the sky decided to throw down that night, and somewhere between 4 and 5 hours of real rest before the whole cycle started over. Here's the part that made it worse. Somebody still had to watch 2,000 animals through total darkness, because cattle don't stop being dangerous the moment the sun goes down. So the crew split into shifts. 2 riders circling the herd in opposite directions for 2 hours at a stretch, singing low the entire time, not for fun. A steady human voice was the one thing standing between a sleeping herd and a full stampede triggered by a drop-tin cup or a coyote's shadow. Trail bosses flatly refused to hire a man who couldn't carry a tune, because every rider would take that shift eventually, and one bad night watch could cost the outfit its entire herd by sunrise. So a cowboy's actual nightly ration wasn't 8 hours. It was whatever remained after his turn in the dark, on a saddle blanket, under a sky that owed him absolutely nothing back. Injuries didn't get a doctor either, at least not a real one. Home remedies did the job, or nobody's job got done. Coal oil for lice, prickly pear pulp packed onto open wounds. A man thrown from his horse into a prairie dog hole just kept riding if he still could, because there was no wagon behind them running a hospital. And stopping the herd for one hurt cowboy meant losing daylight the whole crew needed. Dust worked into every crack of a man's face for weeks at a time, especially for the drag riders eating the herd's dust all day at the back of the line, the lowest job on the crew, and usually the one handed to whoever was newest. The crew itself ran on a strict pecking order. and every man's spot in that order decided how much of the misery landed on him. A trail boss out front made the calls on routes and river crossings, betting the whole outfit's pay on his own judgment. Point riders steered the herd's direction from up ahead. Swing riders held the flanks in line through the middle. Drag riders choked on dust at the rear, and a horse wrangler, somewhere in the mix, kept a spare string of 6 or 7 mounts per man moving, because a single horse, ridden 14 hours a day, would be dead inside a week. Roughly a dozen men handled 2,000 to 3,000 head across 1,000 miles, and by most counts from the era, about 1 cowboy and 6 riding that dusty rear guard or that lead position was black or Hispanic. Men like Ikard, who found on the open trail a kind of standing the rest of the country wasn't offering them anywhere else. Then there was water, and water broke both ways at once. Too little, and 2,000 thirsty animals turned mean and unpredictable, catching a river's scent from miles out and bolting the second it registered. Too much, and a swollen spring river could drown cattle by the dozen, exhausting them until they simply quit swimming mid-current. One drover, crossing a flooded river with his outfit, wrote in his diary that they worked the water from dawn until dusk to get the last of the herd over, and lost a man to drowning before the day was through. He called it a day he'd remember for the rest of his life, and left it at that. Either way, a man had to get the herd across, and that man was in the water with them, not watching safely from the bank. Cattle can smell water from miles off, and thirst makes that sense sharper, which meant the closer a crew got to any river, the more likely the whole herd was to bolt for it on its own timeline, not the trail bosses. Which brings the story back to that 80-mile gap. Goodnight and his partner, Oliver Loving, chose that route on purpose, longer and drier than the direct path, because it skirted Comanche and Kiowa territory. A shorter trail ran straight through. Safer from raids, not safer from thirst. Crews pushed the herd hard across that stretch, sometimes through the night without stopping, because a cow that caught the pecos on the wind from 10 miles out could scatter an outfit's entire income across the desert in 20 minutes. And that's before anything actually went wrong, because the real killer on a cattle drive was never distance. It was the stampede, and it could start from almost nothing: a dropped skillet, a rattlesnake under a hoof, a flash of heat lightning at 2 in the morning. One rider who worked these outfits, a man everybody called Teddy Blue, described what happened when a friend of his got caught in one at night. They found the horse first at daybreak, ribs crushed, hide torn open. His friend lay a few feet away, and by Teddy Blue's own account, there wasn't enough left to recognize except the handle of his 6-shooter. The crew was so shaken that they told the man's family it had been lightning. It hadn't. It was 2,000 panicked animals running blind in the dark over a man who had nowhere left to go. Where a funeral procession should have followed, there was a moment of silence and nothing else. The herd still had hundreds more miles to Kansas or Colorado or wherever the railhead sat waiting, and cattle that stopped moving lose weight, and weight was the only thing that made the whole brutal trip worth running at all. So the crew buried what they could, said what needed saying, and rode back out into the next night watch, because the alternative was losing everything the herd represented. For all of it, a working cowboy made around $30 a month. Not $30 a day, a month. 3 months of 14-hour saddle days, 4 hours of broken sleep, salt pork and biscuits, one 80-mile stretch with no water anywhere on it, and a real chance of ending up unrecognizable in the dark before the trip was over. Bose Ikard rode that exact gauntlet for 4 straight years, riding point some stretches, tracking loose cattle even after dark, fighting through at least 3 engagements with Comanche raiders along the way, and never once, in Goodnight's own written account, shirking a duty or disobeying an order. When Ikard finally settled in Weatherford, Texas, and started a farm of his own, Goodnight didn't walk away and forget him. He visited whenever the trail allowed it. He brought money just to help out an old friend. And when Ikard died in 1929, Goodnight paid for a stone marker over his grave, carved with the same words he'd already said about him while he was still alive, that he'd trusted this one man farther than any other living soul he'd known. And underneath all of it sat the part nobody puts in the cattle drive paintings, the sheer boredom. 12 to 15 miles a day, at a walking pace slow enough that the cattle could graze along the way, day after day after day, across land that barely changed from one horizon to the next. Whatever music existed was whatever a man could hum to himself or coax out of a harmonica back at camp. And word from home arrived only when the outfit finally reached a town, weeks apart at best. The danger was real, but most hours on a drive weren't dangerous at all. They were just long, flat, and exhausting in a way that never let a man fully rest, even when nothing was actively trying to kill him. Picture the actual math before you picture the myth. 14 hours in a saddle, 4 hours of sleep, if the night watch even let you have it. No refrigeration, no roads, and no guarantee you'd recognize your own bunkmate by morning, if the herd ever truly ran. Add it up across 3 months and 1,000 miles, and it's less a job than a war of attrition against your own body, fought for $30 and whatever pride a man could carry out of it. Men like Bose Ikard rode straight into that 80-mile gap again and again anyway. Not because it paid well, because $30 a month says it didn't. Somebody had to. And the man riding beside you was often the only thing standing between an ordinary bad night and a grave nobody could afford to dig properly. Goodnight said as much himself in the plainest words he had. He trusted Ikard farther than any living man, and meant every word of it, until the day one of them was gone. So was the money ever really the point? Or was it always about proving, mile after waterless mile, that you could ride into a stretch with nothing in it and still come out the other side?